I'm Priscilla. The air in the room was thick with tension as my dad stood in front of me, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. It was my 18th birthday party, and the celebration had taken a turn for the worse. Just moments ago, he had proudly announced to our guests that our family had decided to sell the cabin by the lake, a place that held so many precious memories for me. I looked at him, my heart heavy, and said firmly, I never agreed to sell the cabin. His smile froze, and he stammered, she's joking, but I wasn't. As I stand here, I can't help but let my mind wander back in time, to the days when the cabin was a haven of peace and love, and my family was a source of warmth and support. I was 12 years old when my grandfather, Mr. Thompson, picked me up in his old truck and drove me to the lake. The cabin, hidden behind tall pine trees, had a porch that leaned slightly to one side, and a screen door that never closed properly. It smelled of wood smoke, old books, and a sweet fragrance I couldn't quite name. Grandpa was a patient man. He showed me how to check the strength of the wood by pressing my thumb into it. If the wood gives in, it's done, he said. Inside, Grandma Thompson had prepared sandwiches and iced tea on the kitchen table that Grandpa had built himself. That evening, we sat on the porch and watched the lake turn gold. This cabin stays in the family, Grandpa told me quietly. But family isn't always blood, Priscilla. Family is whoever shows up. At that age, I thought he was just being poetic, but I was wrong. Over the next few years, I spent almost every weekend at the cabin. Grandpa taught me how to fix leaks and check the roof, while Grandma showed me how to organize books by color to make the room feel warmer. They treated me like I was the most important person in the world, and I felt like I belonged. Back at home in our suburban house, things were different. My younger sister, Lily, had a big bedroom with pink walls and expensive furniture, while my room still had the old carpet from the previous owners. One night at dinner, my dad, Mr. Anderson, brought up the cabin. The cabin is losing value, he said as he cut his steak. We should sell it and reinvest. My mom, Mrs. Anderson, nodded in agreement. Makes sense, she said. I spoke up, Grandpa said the cabin stays in the family. Dad laughed dismissively. You were 12, Priscilla. He was just being nice. The conversation then shifted to Lily's dance competition, and no one asked about the art competition I had won a few weeks ago. After dinner, I noticed a flyer on the counter for a lakeside development project. Someone had written a phone number on it. I stared at it for a long time, realizing that someone was already eyeing my grandparents' cabin as a source of profit. 2 years later, Grandpa passed away. I was 14. At the funeral, I saw Dad and Uncle Carl standing near the refreshment table. Uncle Carl had a folder under his arm. We should move on this before probate gets complicated, he whispered. They were talking about selling the cabin at my grandfather's funeral. I was too young and shocked to say anything. Little did I know that Grandpa had already planned for this moment. 2 more years passed, and Grandma got sick. In her final days, she held my hand tightly and whispered, the cabin is yours, Priscilla. Don't let them take it. I promised her I wouldn't. After her funeral, Dad seemed relieved. Now we can finally sort out the property, he said. That night, I heard him talking to Uncle Carl in the garage. Let's get this moving, Dad said. I stood in the hallway, holding a glass of water, and a chill ran down my spine. I realized that Grandma's death was an opportunity for them, but a great loss for me. I didn't cry, instead, I made a decision. From the age of 16 to 18, the cabin became my refuge. Every Saturday, I would drive there in the old car I bought with my part-time job money. I fixed torn screens, swept pine needles off the roof, and repaired the weather stripping. At home, the talk about the cabin changed. It was no longer Grandpa's place but the family property. Uncle Carl started visiting more often, sometimes bringing folders and real estate papers. One night, I finally spoke up. Grandma wanted me to keep it, I said. Mom gently put down her fork and said, "Your grandma was emotional near the end. This is business." By the time I was 17, Dad became more direct. "When you turn 18, we'll settle this as a family," he said, but the way he said family made me feel uneasy. One afternoon at the cabin, I found an envelope hidden behind old quilts. My name was written on the front. Inside was a business card of an attorney, Miss Emily Harris. Below her name were the words Thompson Family Trust. My hands trembled. Grandma had hidden this for me to find. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Miss Harris called me. "I need to speak with you before your birthday," she said carefully. That Saturday, I met her in her office. It smelled of coffee and old paper. She opened a folder and looked at me directly. "Your grandparents created an irrevocable trust 6 years ago," she said. "The cabin, savings, and investments were placed inside it. The total value is about $2.5 million. You are the sole beneficiary." I was in shock. "Why didn't they tell Dad?" I asked. Ms. Harris paused. "Your grandfather told me that his sons would sell the cabin before the funeral flowers wilted. And recently, someone has been asking questions about the title." After that meeting, I started paying closer attention. One Sunday, Uncle Carl came over for dinner. Afterward, he and Dad went into the garage. I stood near the cracked door and listened. "I already signed the purchase agreement with Lakeside Developers for $500,000, Uncle Carl said. My heart sank. "How do we clean up the title?" Dad asked. "We file a quick claim deed. Mom and Dad are gone. We're the legal heirs." "What about Priscilla?" "She's 17. She can't stop anything," Uncle Carl laughed. "We'll give her $50,000 for college. She should be grateful." I stepped away from the door, my hands cold. That night, I texted Miss Harris, "They're accelerating." Her reply came quickly, "I expected that." The next Saturday, Miss Harris explained everything. "The moment you turn 18, you legally become the successor beneficiary. Once you sign the paperwork, I'll file a legal notice at the county office first thing in the morning. Nobody will be able to sell the property. If they try, they'll fail." I looked at the papers and asked, "Should I tell my parents?" Ms. Harris slowly removed her glasses. "Your grandfather asked me to protect you, not negotiate with them." 9 days before my birthday, Dad announced he was throwing me a party. Big celebration. "You only turn 18 once," he said with a smile. I smiled back, but I knew the truth. My dad was planning a party, and Uncle Carl was planning to steal my cabin. I was waiting for them to walk into the trap my grandparents had set years ago. 5 days before my birthday, Mom sat beside me on the couch. "Now that you're almost 18, we should make some family decisions together," she said softly. "The cabin costs money: taxes, repairs, insurance. If we sell it, we can pay debts and help both you and Lily." I said, "Grandma wanted me to keep it." Mom's patience slipped for a moment. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Priscilla." Dad walked in at that moment. "I already talked to a buyer," he said proudly. "What company?" I asked. "Lakeside something." I already knew. "I'll think about it," I said. Dad smiled. "That's my girl." Later that night, Lily came into my room. "Mom and Dad keep talking about the cabin after they think I'm asleep. They sound excited. Is something happening?" she whispered. I tucked the blanket around her feet. "Don't worry about it," I said, but she still looked worried. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Carl stopped me in the driveway. He smiled like a salesman. "The land alone is worth $500,000. You say yes, and you walk away with $50,000 cash, and you get the rest. You're young, Priscilla. $50,000 is a lot of money, he said. I asked, whose name is on the deed? Your grandparents, but they're gone now, he replied. That's not how ownership works, I said. For a second, his expression changed, then he smiled again. Don't overthink this. As soon as he drove away, I knew he was calling someone. The night before my birthday, I drove to the cabin alone. The lake was dark and silent. I sat on Grandpa's porch chair and opened Miss Harris's email. All the legal papers were ready, waiting for my signature. At midnight, I read every page twice, then closed the laptop and listened to the lake. Grandpa once told me, patience isn't weakness. It's timing. I finally understood. Tears welled up in my eyes, not because I was weak, but because I wished things were different. I wished my father cared more about family memories than property values. I wished my mother had asked what I wanted. I wished I didn't need legal papers to protect myself from my own family. I went home and set my alarm for 11:45 p.m. At midnight, I would turn 18 and everything would change. At 11:50 p.m. The house was silent. I joined a video call with Miss Harris. Ready? She asked. The clock struck midnight, and I signed the acceptance papers. Just like that, I officially became the legal beneficiary of the Thompson Family Trust. Ms. Harris explained the next step. At 8 a.m. I'll file a legal notice with the county office. Once it's recorded, nobody can sell the property. I looked at the signed page in my hands. This isn't a trick, Miss Harris said gently. This is your grandparents' final gift. Downstairs, my family slept peacefully, unaware that Uncle Carl's fake paperwork was already worthless. That same night, Uncle Carl printed forged documents at his apartment. He called Dad around 11:30. Everything's ready. We file tomorrow morning, he said. Dad sounded nervous. You sure this works? Simple transfer between heirs, Uncle Carl replied, but it wasn't simple. My birthday party started at 4 in the afternoon. The living room was filled with neighbors, friends, and relatives. There were balloons, cake, and silver decorations. I smiled and opened gifts, but inside my jacket pocket was the paper that would change everything. Dad stood near the cake and raised his glass. Priscilla is officially an adult today, he announced proudly. And our family has exciting plans for the future. He looked directly at me. Right, Priscilla? Every face turned toward me. Thanks, Dad, I said, saying nothing more. Later, Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor who lived near the cabin, quietly pulled me aside. I saw your uncle at the property last week. He brought 2 men in suits and measured the land. He had already shown the property to buyers before he even owned it, she whispered. After the cake was served, Dad stood again. Our family has struggled financially, he announced loudly. But Mr. and Mrs. Thompson left us something valuable, the cabin by the lake. And as a family, we've decided to sell it. The words hit me like a cold shower. Dad smiled at me. Priscilla understands this is best for everyone. I slowly set down my fork. I never agreed to sell the cabin, I said. Dad's smile froze. She's joking, he laughed nervously. I'm not joking, I said. Uncle Carl stepped forward. This isn't the time for this. I looked at him calmly. You're right. The time is 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning. Silence filled the room. Nobody understood what I meant, but Uncle Carl suddenly looked nervous. Guests started leaving soon after. Once the house emptied, Mom turned toward me angrily. Do you have any idea what your father is going through? He could lose this house. And you're trying to sell Grandma's, she shouted. We are a family, she continued. And if you love this family, you wouldn't need a lawyer. I was stunned. How do you know about a lawyer? I asked. Mom admitted that Uncle Carl had searched through my bag and found Miss Harris's business card. Before I could speak, Mrs. Jenkins stepped into the kitchen. That girl has every right to speak with a lawyer, she said firmly. Mom glared at her. This is family business. Mrs. Jenkins didn't back down. Mrs. Thompson would want Priscilla protected. After Mrs. Jenkins left, Dad closed the kitchen door. Here's what's going to happen, Dad said slowly. Tomorrow morning, we file the paperwork. The cabin sells. You get $50,000. Out of how much? Nobody answered. And if I refuse? I asked. Dad's face hardened. Then you're on your own. No help with college. No living under this roof. I stood up. I am part of this family. I'm the part that keeps promises, I said quietly, then walked upstairs. That night, I sat on my bed holding the signed trust papers. My grandparents had known exactly what would happen and had protected me long before I even understood why I needed it. At 8 a.m. The next morning, the county recorder's office opened. Ms. Harris was the first person through the door. She handed over the trust documents and filed the legal notice against the cabin property. At 8:14, Ms. Harris called me. It's done, she said. I sat quietly at the kitchen table eating cereal. Dad and Uncle Carl came downstairs dressed for business. We'll be back by lunch, Dad said while grabbing his keys. I looked up calmly. Good luck. At 9:05 a.m. Uncle Carl handed his quick claim deed to the county clerk. The clerk typed the property number into her computer and then stopped. I can't record this document, she said. Uncle Carl blinked. Excuse me? The property is owned by the Thompson Family Irrevocable Trust. It has been for 6 years, the clerk replied. Dad stepped forward. That's impossible. The clerk added, there's also a legal notice filed this morning. Uncle Carl's face turned pale. Dad slowly turned toward him. You said this was simple. I didn't know about the trust. You're a real estate agent. How did you not check? Dad shouted. Ms. Harris sat quietly in the waiting area, watching everything happen. At 9:22, Dad called me. What did you do? He demanded. I accepted what Grandma and Grandpa left me, I said softly. You went behind our backs with some lawyer. Dad, the lawyer has been involved for 6 years. You just never asked, I replied. Heavy silence filled the line. This was my parents' property, he whispered. And they chose me to protect it. Not because they didn't love you, I said carefully. Because they didn't trust you with it. Dad hung up. A few minutes later, Lakeside Developers called me. Their lawyer sounded frustrated. We have a signed contract from Carl Anderson. He doesn't own the property, I replied. There was a pause. Then the lawyer asked quietly, is the cabin for sale? No, I said. That same afternoon, Miss Harris gave me worse news. The notary stamp on Carl's paperwork appears fake, she said. That's illegal, isn't it? I asked. Yes, she replied. Dad came home around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, looking exhausted. Mom had clearly been crying. Dad sat across from me at the table. The bank is after me for $200,000. The store is gone. The cabin was supposed to save us, he admitted quietly. I'm sorry about the business, I said honestly. But the cabin was never yours to sell. Mom stepped forward. Your grandparents weren't thinking clearly near the end. They created the trust 6 years before they died, I replied. Dad slammed his hand on the table. I'll contest the trust. Then Miss Harris's voice came through my phone speaker. I had already called her. Mr. Anderson, fighting this trust will cost more than the property itself. The trust is airtight, she said calmly. Dad stared at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something different in his eyes, not anger, but defeat. 2 hours later, Uncle Carl called the house. Lakeside is suing me for damages. They're accusing me of fraud, his voice shook. Dad's answer was cold. Did you commit fraud? You're a real estate agent. You never checked? Silence. Then Uncle Carl admitted, I found a notary stamp. Dad inhaled sharply. And that's forgery, Uncle Carl whispered. I need a lawyer. So do I, Dad replied before hanging up. Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart. Lakeside developers sued Uncle Carl. The county opened an investigation into the fake notary stamp. Uncle Carl's real estate license was suspended. One afternoon, Uncle Carl called me. Please, ask your lawyer to remove the legal notice. Maybe I can still fix this, he begged. The notice stays. Your grandparents would be ashamed of you, I said. I looked at Grandpa's framed photo on my desk. My grandparents are the reason the trust exists. They chose this, I answered quietly. He hung up. Dad eventually stopped fighting. He sold the store at a loss and worked out a payment plan with the bank. Mom went back to work at